The wind had started to die down, but the storm clouds still loomed thick above the Kentucky countryside. Officer Rachel Monroe gripped the steering wheel with one hand and a flashlight with the other as she turned onto the dirt path leading to Ridgeway Road. The call that came through dispatch 20 minutes earlier hadn't sounded urgent, just a local farmer. REPORTING strange noises coming from the old abandoned barn at the edge of his property. Probably just a raccoon, he'd muttered. But something in his voice made Rachel decide to check it out herself. Beside her in the patrol car, Deputy Marcus King yawned. "We really out here chasing ghosts now," Rachel shrugged. "Sometimes the ghosts are real." They pulled up beside the collapsed fence. The barn was a leaning skeleton of rotted wood, its roof sunken and walls overgrown with ivy. Rachel stepped out first, boots crunching the wet gravel beneath her feet. The late evening light cast long shadows across the field, and the air was thick with the smell of damp hay and old timber. The moment they stepped inside, it hit them a sound. Very faint, not animal, not wind. It was a soft, uneven breathing. A whimper. Rachel raised her hand, signaling for silence. There, behind a broken stack of wooden crates and rusted tools, was a small shape. She crept closer, flashlight trembling slightly in her hand. Then she saw them. A little girl, filthy, no older than 6, crouched low against the wall, her arms locked around a large, mud-covered German shepherd. The girl's blonde hair was matted with dirt, her dress torn at the Her eyes were wide, terrified, darting back and forth between the officers. The dog growled low, protective, but didn't move. His body curled tightly around the girl, shielding her like a wall of fur and muscle. Rachel slowly knelt, setting the flashlight down to avoid alarming them further. "Hey there, sweetheart," she said gently. "My name's Rachel. I'm a police officer. Are you okay?" The girl said nothing. Her arms gripped the dog tighter, trembling. The dog's eyes locked onto Rachel's, alert but not hostile. Rachel looked at the badge on her chest, then back at the girl. "You're safe now. I promise. What's your name?" Still, no answer. Rachel glanced at Deputy King, who was already radioing in for medical support. She inched forward. "Is that your dog?" The girl nodded, just once. "He's a brave boy." Rachel smiled. "Does he have a name?" The girl's lips barely moved, but Rachel saw them form a whisper. "Max." Rachel took a chance. "Can Max and I be friends?" The girl didn't answer, but her grip on the dog loosened slightly. Max's growl faded into a low pant, and his tail twitched. Minutes later, paramedics arrived, but the girl screamed when one of them tried to touch her. It wasn't until Rachel said, "He comes with her," that they were allowed to lift her into the ambulance. With Max still pressed against her side, in the flashing lights of the ambulance, Rachel sat beside her, holding a warm blanket around the girl's shaking shoulders. The child still hadn't said another word. Rachel looked at her and asked softly, "Where's your mommy, sweetheart?" The girl stared at the wall, then at Max. She placed her hand gently on his fur, closed her eyes, and whispered so faintly Rachel barely heard it. "He said if I made a sound, he'd shoot Max first." Rachel blinked. Her breath caught. She looked into the girl's eyes, and for the first time, saw a horror far deeper than getting lost or being afraid of the dark. Something terrible had happened, and this little girl alongside. Her loyal, battered dog had survived it alone. What she had run from was still out there, and now Rachel was determined to find out the rest. The emergency room was quiet, except for the steady hum of machines and the occasional beep from portable monitors. Sophie lay curled on the hospital bed, wrapped in a thin blanket. She hadn't let go of Max since the moment they brought her in. The German shepherd sat like a sentry at her side, his head resting across her small chest, as though shielding her from everything memories, strangers, the world. Rachel Monroe stood by the window, arms folded tightly across her chest. She had seen abuse cases before, runaways, kids forgotten by broken systems. But something about Sophie, her silence, her steel-like grip on Max, told Rachel this wasn't just another case. A nurse stepped in. "We need to examine our officer, but she's refusing to let us near the dog." Rachel nodded. She trusts him more than anyone else right now. "Let me try again." She walked over slowly and crouched beside the bed. Max raised his head, watching her. Sophie peeked from behind his ear. Rachel offered a small, gentle smile. "Hey, sweetheart. It's me again, Rachel. Remember me?" Sophie blinked, silent. "The nurse just wants to make sure you're okay. But they need Max to step off the bed for just a minute." Sophie shook her head violently. No, he has to stay." Rachel paused. "Why?" The little girl looked up, her lip trembling. And then, in a voice so soft Rachel had to lean in close, she said, "Because he's the only one who didn't." "Leave me." Rachel's throat tightened. She reached out, gently touching Sophie's tiny hand. "Max isn't going anywhere," she whispered. "Not while you need him. I promise." Sophie didn't reply, but she relaxed just slightly, her head resting back against Max's fur. With permission from the doctor, they did a preliminary examination right there, with Max watching every move. The results were sobering. Sophie was severely dehydrated. She had scratches and insect bites all over her legs, blisters on her feet, and bruises on her arms, some fresh, some fading. Max had cuts too, and a gash near his hind leg that had scabbed over. But even with the pain, he hadn't left her side. Not once. Later that evening, as the hospital quieted, Rachel sat beside her again, with a juice box and a small coloring book. Sophie clutched the crayon without drawing. Rachel watched her quietly. "You're very brave," she said softly. "Do you know that?" Sophie didn't answer. "I don't know everything that happened yet," Rachel continued, "but I think you've been through something no little girl should ever go through." Sophie's eyes filled, but no tears fell. Rachel leaned closer. "Can you tell me who said he would hurt Max?" Sophie opened her mouth, then closed it. After a long pause, she whispered, "Gary." "Is that your mommy's friend?" She nodded. "Did he hurt your mommy?" Sophie froze. Her fingers squeezed the crayon so tight it snapped in half. Her lips moved again, forming a single word. "Yes." Rachel breathed in slowly, steadying herself. "Did you see it happen?" "I heard it. I tried to stop him, but he pushed me, locked her in the closet, said if I screamed, he'd shoot Max and leave me in the woods. He had a gun." Rachel felt her blood go cold. "What did you do?" Sophie stared at the ceiling, then at Max. "I waited till he fell asleep. Then I opened the back door. I told Max to run with me. We didn't stop running." Her voice cracked for the first time. "I didn't cry. I didn't scream. I just wanted to keep Max safe." Rachel leaned in, gently placing a hand on the girl's shoulder. "You saved each other." Sophie nodded, eyes finally wet. "But what if he finds us?" Rachel said firmly, "He won't. I promise. I won't let him." She meant every word. Outside the hospital room, she made a call. "Detective Briggs? We've got a name. Gary. We need to find him. Fast." Because now it wasn't just a rescue. It was a race. And the man who hurt this girl was still out there. Detective Nate Briggs arrived at the hospital just after sunrise, his coat still damp from the drizzle outside. He was no stranger to child abuse cases. But the moment he read Sophie's preliminary statement, something inside him twisted. It wasn't just the brutality, it was how long she'd survived out there, how far she'd traveled on tiny feet, all while protecting her dog. That kind of resilience was rare and tragic. Rachel met him at the entrance, dark circles under her eyes. She hadn't left Sophie's side all night. She trusts me, Rachel said quietly. Barely, but it's a start. Briggs opened his notepad. Tell me everything she said about this man, Gary. Rachel nodded. She said he hurt her mother, locked her in a closet, took Sophie and the dog to a cabin, but she escaped while he was asleep. No vehicle, no food. She ran. She says he threatened to shoot the dog first if she screamed. Briggs sighed. Jesus, you believe her? Rachel gave him a sharp look. Every word. Back in Sophie's room, the little girl sat propped up in bed, sipping orange juice. Max had been bandaged up by a vet tech who volunteered to help, and now rested at her feet, dozing. When Sophie saw Briggs, she tensed. It's okay, Rachel said softly. This is Nate. He's a detective. He just wants to help find your mom. Sophie didn't speak. She reached down and stroked Max's back. Briggs crouched beside the bed. You're very brave, Sophie, and smart. That's why you and Max are here. But we need to know more. Do you remember the name of the road you were on before you got to the barn? Sophie looked up. I don't know the name, just trees, and a sign with a deer on it, and red flowers. Rachel and Briggs exchanged a glance. She means the deer crossing sign, Briggs muttered. Could be Route 28 through Gray Hollow. There's a poppy field near mile marker 10, Rachel nodded. That's 40 miles from here. And she walked it, Briggs said, shaking his head in disbelief. They moved fast. A team was dispatched to the last known address of Sophie's mother, a small rental house in a dying neighborhood. When officers kicked down the locked door, the house was eerily silent. Then, a muffled sound dot in the pantry behind shelves, behind a false panel. They found her, Sophie's mother, pale and dehydrated, with bruises across her arms and face, tied up and barely conscious, but alive. Paramedics rushed her to the hospital, and when Rachel whispered the words, Sophie is safe, the mother broke into quiet sobs. Back at the precinct, investigators started pulling Gary's background. Gary Leland. No prior convictions, but several complaints from neighbors shouting, suspicious behavior, suspected drug activity. He was nowhere to be found. The search expanded. Meanwhile, media outlets began catching wind of the story. Little girl and dog survive wilderness escape. Local news stations aired blurry traffic cam footage showing Sophie and Max crossing a gas station parking lot weeks earlier. Viewers called in with sightings, including one that stood out: an older man with a duffel bag and a handgun spotted at a remote trailhead 2 days earlier. Rachel stayed close to Sophie, often reading to her, sometimes just sitting in silence. The child rarely spoke unless Max was nearby. But when he was, she opened up slowly, like a flower curling toward sunlight. One afternoon, Sophie drew a picture herself, Max, her mother, and a dark figure holding a gun in the shadows. Rachel bent down. Is that Gary? Sophie nodded. He wanted to keep me forever. Sighed. I was his now. Rachel's blood ran cold. Now they had more than enough. Assault, kidnapping, attempted murder. The charges were stacking, but it wouldn't mean anything unless they found him. Sophie was healing, but her fear hadn't gone. Every knock at the door made her flinch. Every loud voice made her tremble. And Rachel knew until Gary was behind bars, Sophie wouldn't sleep soundly. No one would. Asterisk detective. Briggs leaned over the computer monitor in the precinct's surveillance lab, his jaw tightening as grainy footage played back in silence. It was from a rural gas station off Route 28, time-stamped 9 days earlier. Sophie, barefoot and thin, holding Max's collar, her eyes darting nervously as she scanned the pumps. She looked lost, hungry, exhausted. And yet alive. Briggs leaned. back, exhaling. She made it all the way to this point with no help, no food, no shelter. Rachel, standing behind him, didn't take her eyes off the screen. She was looking for a way out, and she kept Max fed before herself. They fast-forwarded the footage. On the edge of the frame, headlights flashed. A pickup truck slowed, and the tailgate dropped. Sophie crouched behind Max, frozen. But the truck didn't stop, it rolled. Forward and out of frame. She waited until it was safe. Rachel muttered. Next clip. A traffic cam caught Sophie and Max trudging along the side of a highway in the rain. She had wrapped a shirt around Max's leg. He was limping. Rachel's heart ached. No child should ever go through that. The footage was released to media channels. That night, the news ran the headline. Sophie's Journey 6-year-old and dog survived 12-day escape. Across the country, the story struck a chord. Thousands of comments poured in online. Offers to adopt Max. Offers to support Sophie's recovery. But the manhunt was still the focus. Then came the tip that changed everything. A woman in a mountain town 3 hours north reported seeing a man who looked off, lingering near a diner. He was wearing a weathered jacket, carrying a duffel bag and asking strange questions about the local trails. She had seen the news report about Sophie that morning. Rachel and Briggs drove straight out, no hesitation. Local law enforcement joined them at the diner, but Gary was already gone. He'd paid cash for coffee, left no name, but had left something else behind, a crumpled fast food wrapper with a partial fingerprint. It matched his DMV record. They were close now. Meanwhile, back at the hospital, Sophie had begun speaking more mostly to Max, but sometimes in Rachel's presence. She colored quietly on the hospital bed, drawing her escape, fields, woods, rivers. In each sketch, Max was right beside her. One afternoon, Sophie tugged at Rachel's sleeve. Do people know what Max did? Rachel tilted her head. They do now. Did they see the part where he pulled me out of the mud? Rachel blinked. No. What happened? Sophie looked down. I got stuck. Near a river. The mud pulled my shoe off and I fell. I couldn't move. I cried. I was scared. But Max... he grabbed my backpack strap. Pulled and pulled. Until I got out. Rachel's eyes misted. He never left, Sophie whispered. Even when I wanted to stop. That evening, Max was awarded a medal from the local sheriff's department. The small ceremony was held in the hospital lobby, attended by nurses, deputies, and a few reporters. Rachel held Sophie's hand as the sheriff bent to hang the medal on Max's collar. This dog, he said, is more than a pet. He's a guardian angel. The crowd clapped. Sophie didn't smile, but her grip on Rachel's hand tightened. That night, after Sophie fell asleep, Rachel stood by the hospital window, watching headlights blur past on the rain-soaked road below. Briggs called her from the diner parking lot. We found Gary's trail. He's camping in the woods nearby. Locals said they saw him with a gun. We go in tomorrow, first light. Rachel's voice dropped to a whisper. Be careful. We will, Briggs said. But if he thinks he's getting away with what he did, he's wrong. Rachel turned to look at Sophie, sleeping peacefully for once, Max snoring softly. At her side, she pressed her hand to the glass. We're coming for you, Gary, she whispered. And this time, you're not slipping away. At sunrise, the woods surrounding Blackwater Ridge were thick with mist. Pines stood tall like silent sentries, and the air was heavy with tension. Dozens of officers from local and state departments had gathered quietly around the trailhead. Some carried rifles, others tracking gear. Detective Briggs stood at the center of the group, briefing them in a low voice. We believe Gary Leland is armed and camping somewhere within a 3-mile radius, he said. He's dangerous, unpredictable, and desperate. This is not just a fugitive. This is a man who kidnapped a child, nearly killed her mother, and forced a 6-year-old to flee into the wild. Stay sharp. Rachel stood beside him, suited in, her vest and radio headset. She wasn't supposed to be there. Hospital duty was her assignment. But when she looked into Sophie's eyes that morning, saw the fear still resting, just behind the blue she couldn't stay behind. She deserves to know he won't hurt anyone else. Rachel had told Briggs, "Let me help end this." Briggs had nodded. Understanding that, they broke into teams and entered the woods in staggered lines, boots crunching over fallen leaves, radios crackling softly. 2 hours in, a signal came from a drone operator overhead. "Got movement," the pilot said. "One person, North Ridge, tarp and a campfire." Briggs's team redirected immediately. They moved silently, flanking the perimeter dot as they neared the ridge. The stench of old smoke and unwashed clothes filled the air. Behind a cluster of boulders, they found the site. A blue tarp stretched between 2 trees, a rusted camp stove, and more importantly, a duffel bag half open, with a pistol lying just outside it, hands in the air. Briggs shouted, weapon raised. A man shot upright from under the tarp, thin, wild-eyed, face covered in scruff. Gary Leland. He reached for the gun. 2 warning shots were fired. "Drop IT." Gary froze, chest heaving. Then slowly he stepped back, raising his hands. "Don't shoot," he spat. "You have no idea what she did. She turned her mom against me." Briggs stepped forward. "You nearly killed that little girl's mother. You threatened a child with a gun. You're done, Gary." Rachel moved in, cuffs ready. Her hands trembled not from fear, but from fury. She secured his wrists tightly. Gary glared at her. That brat deserved it. She was always looking at me like I was some monster. Rachel met his eyes coldly. "Because you were." They marched him out of the woods. A helicopter overhead captured the moment. Gary Leland, in cuffs, blood on his lip from biting down in rage, stumbling as officers led him away. That night, the footage played on every news channel. Back at the hospital, Sophie sat on the bed in silence as Rachel walked in. She looked up slowly. "Is it over?" Rachel smiled, sitting beside her. "It's over, sweetheart. He's gone. He can't hurt you anymore." Sophie didn't react right away. Then she turned to Max and whispered something in his ear. The dog licked her cheek, tail thumping softly. "What did you tell him?" Rachel asked gently. Sophie looked back, her voice barely audible. "I told him he can sleep now. He doesn't have to protect me all the time." Rachel swallowed hard, her throat tight with emotion. Sophie looked down at her fingers. "Will he go away now that I'm safe?" Rachel placed her hand over Sophie's. "No, honey, he's not going anywhere. He's part of your story, and you're part of his." For the first time since they'd met, Sophie smiled, just a small, fleeting smile. But it was real. Outside the room, doctors finalized paperwork. Gary was being transferred to state custody. Sophie's mother was improving. And Max? Max was becoming more than just a hero dog. He was a symbol of something people desperately needed to believe in again. Loyalty, survival, and love that never gives up. But the story wasn't over yet. The courtroom awaited. Sophie, braver than anyone realized, was about to face it all. Head on. The courthouse smelled of old wood and rain. Outside, a summer storm battered the windows. Thunder rolled low like a warning, and lightning briefly lit up the dark skies above Kentucky County Court. Inside courtroom 2B, rows of reporters, officers, and curious citizens sat silent, eyes forward. On the stand sat Sophie. She wore a pale blue dress and held Max's leash tightly in her little hand. Max, now certified as a therapy dog for the day, sat calmly beside her feet, his eyes scanning the room protectively. a bright red bandana wrapped loosely around his neck. Rachel stood a few feet away, ready to intervene if Sophie froze or panicked. But Sophie looked straight ahead. Her small voice, clear and quiet, echoed across the courtroom. "He said he'd shoot Max first, then me." Gasps rippled through the room. Sophie's fingers gripped the wood of the stand, but her voice didn't waver. "He locked my mom in the closet. She was bleeding. She told me to be brave. So I ran with Max when he was sleeping. We didn't have food. Max found water in puddles. When I fell in the mud, he pulled me out." Gary Leland, seated at the defense table in an orange jumpsuit, stared straight ahead. His lawyer had barely mounted a defense. Too much evidence, too many eyewitnesses, too many lies already exposed. The prosecutor, a seasoned woman named Gail Simmons, stood beside Sophie now. "Did Gary ever say he loved you?" Sophie looked confused. "He said I was his, like a dog, but he hit dogs too." The room fell into deep silence. Max, sensing her distress, nuzzled her knee. She touched his head gently, and Rachel caught the moment, a child clinging, not just to a dog, but to safety itself. The testimony ended after only 20 minutes. Short, simple, devastating. The judge recessed court. For an hour. In the hallway, Sophie sat in a chair, swinging her feet gently, Max resting beside her. Rachel knelt down. "You did something really brave today," she said. "I'm proud of you." Sophie looked up. "I didn't cry." Rachel nodded. "You didn't have to. But if you ever want to, it's okay." Sophie was quiet for a moment. "Will he go away forever?" "Maybe not forever," Rachel admitted honestly, "but for a very, very long time. He won't come near you. He won't come near your mom. I promise." Sophie leaned into Max. "He kept me safe when no one else could." "You kept each other safe," Rachel corrected. "And now a whole town is here to keep you safe too." The verdict came quickly. Guilty on all counts: kidnapping, child endangerment, aggravated assault, attempted homicide. The judge didn't hesitate in sentencing. 30-5 years. No parole. Gary didn't say a word as he was let out. No outburst, no apology. Just silence. Sophie watched him go, her expression unreadable. Then she whispered something only Rachel could hear. "I'm not scared anymore." That night, the storm broke. Rain poured down on the streets of the town. But inside the hospital, where Sophie had temporarily returned, there was calm. Her mother, now walking again with help, sat beside her, brushing her daughter's hair for the first time in weeks. Rachel stood at the door with Max. He'd been groomed, his wounds healed, his eyes as sharp and kind as ever. The red bandana still hung proudly. The mayor himself had signed a special order, allowing Max to remain with Sophie through all recovery proceedings and beyond. That night, as Sophie tucked Max into a blanket and kissed his head, she looked up at Rachel. "Do people know what Max did?" "They do," Rachel smiled. "They call him a hero." Sophie beamed a real smile this time, one that reached her eyes. "No," she whispered. "He's not a hero. He's my best friend." Rachel turned her face away to hide the tears. Outside, the rain washed away the last of the storm, and somewhere deep in her heart, Sophie knew it was finally safe to sleep. The courtroom was packed with an expectant silence as the trial entered its final day. Outside, the summer sun shone brightly, but inside the room, the air was heavy with tension and quiet anticipation. The judge's gavel had barely struck the bench when the moment arrived. The testimony of the little girl who had survived against all odds. Sophie sat upright in the witness chair, Max resting loyally at her feet, his warm presence a steady comfort. The attorneys exchanged glances, knowing this testimony would seal the fate of the man accused of destroying a family's life. The prosecutor, Gail Simmons, approached gently, her voice warm but firm. "Sophie, Can you tell us what happened on the night you left your home? Sophie's small voice rose clearly across the room. Gary hurt my mommy. He was very mean. He locked her in the closet. Mommy was bleeding, and she told me to be brave. So Max and I ran away. The courtroom seemed to hold its breath as she recounted the days she spent wandering, frightened but determined, with Max never leaving her side. When asked about her dog, Sophie's eyes lit up. Max saved me many times. When I fell in the mud, he pulled me out. When I was scared, he stayed close. I whispered to him, and he never left. The jurors listened, some wiping tears away. Sophie's courage was undeniable. Then a hush fell as Sophie softly whispered, "He said if I made a sound, he'd shoot Max first, then me." Gasps echoed from the crowd. The courtroom was thick with emotion. The defense tried to question Sophie gently, but her words were steady and sure. She refused to be intimidated, standing strong with Max as her shield. After the testimony, Rachel guided Sophie out of the courtroom, the little girl's hand tightly gripping the leash dot outside. The crowd waited, reporters, neighbors, friends, who had followed the story since the barn. The judge's verdict came swiftly. Gary Leland was found guilty on all charges. His sentence, 35 years in prison without parole, felt like a small victory against the shadow of his cruelty. As Gary was led away in handcuffs, Sophie watched silently, her face a mask of calm. Later, at a small ceremony organized by the town's sheriff, Max was awarded a medal for bravery. Rachel stood beside Sophie, the dog's medal gleaming in the afternoon sun. Sophie whispered to Max, "You didn't save me once. You saved me every day." The sheriff smiled. "This dog reminds us all of what loyalty and courage mean." In the days that followed, Sophie's life began to change. She was placed in a loving foster home. With Rachel's full support, Max was allowed to stay by her side. For the first time, Sophie laughed, and when Rachel asked what she wanted to be. When she grew up, Sophie's eyes sparkled. A hero, like Max. The sun rose over the quiet town as Sophie's new chapter began. The little girl who had once been found trembling in an abandoned barn, clinging to her loyal dog Max, was slowly learning what safety and love truly meant. Rachel Monroe stood in the cozy living room of her small house, watching Sophie and Max play in the backyard. The walls were decorated with colorful drawings, flowers, trees, and a large picture of Sophie and Max, side by side, smiling. Sophie's laughter rang out, light and free for the first time in years. Rachel's heart swelled. She had petitioned for Sophie's adoption, and though the legal process was ongoing, every day felt like a step toward healing. Max, now clean and healthy, bounded after Sophie, his tail wagging like a metronome. He was more than a dog. He was a protector, a friend, and a symbol of hope. Earlier that morning, the town's mayor had honored Max with a special medal during a small ceremony in the community park. The plaque read, "To Max, guardian, hero, best friend." As Rachel watched Sophie hug Max tightly, she whispered to herself, "This is just the beginning." Later, Sophie sat at the kitchen table, coloring quietly while Rachel prepared dinner. The little girl's fingers moved with confidence now, her face radiant. Rachel knelt beside her. "Do you remember when you first told me about Gary?" Sophie nodded solemnly. "I was so scared, but Max kept me brave." Rachel smiled. "You were both so strong." Sophie looked up, eyes shining. "People say angels have wings, but I think mine has fur." Rachel's throat tightened. "I think you're right." That night, as Sophie fell asleep with Max curled at her feet, Rachel sat by the window, reflecting on everything that had happened. From that terrifying night in the barn, to the courtroom, where Sophie's courage shone brightest, to this peaceful moment, it felt like a miracle. She knew the road ahead wouldn't be easy. Healing from trauma took time. But Sophie was not alone. Any more. Max was by her side. And Rachel was ready to fight for her future. The following weeks brought more smiles and fewer tears. Sophie's foster family, supported by Rachel, gave her the stability she deserved. She started school again, where her teachers and classmates welcomed her with open arms. One afternoon, Sophie surprised Rachel with a handmade card. On the front, a drawing of Sophie, Max, and Rachel standing under a bright sun. Inside, the words, "Thank you for saving me. I love you." Rachel held the card close, tears streaming down her cheeks. In that moment, she knew their bond was unbreakable. Max nudged her hand, reminding her that sometimes the simplest acts of loyalty, like a dog's quiet presence, could save a life. Together, they had found hope in the darkest of places. And for Sophie, Max, and Rachel, the future was a promise waiting to be written.